Welcome everyone to the FASD Hub and Learning with FASD webinar. Before we start, I'd like to pay my respects to the traditional owners of the land on which we all meet. I join from the land of the Wallumeggadigal people of the Eora Nation in Sydney. My name is Elizabeth Elliott. I'm a paediatrician at the Children's Hospital Westmead, a professor of paediatrics at the University of Sydney, and I chair the FASD Hub Australia. The FASD Hub was founded by the Australian government in 2016. We aim to raise awareness of fetal alcohol spectrum disorder and alcohol use in pregnancy, and to be a one-stop shop for evidence-based resources. The Hub connects clinicians with researchers and policymakers and provides information for them from individuals and families who are living with FASD. We house the Australian Guide to the Diagnosis of FASD, the Directory of FASD Services, and Australian Research and Policy, and many educational resources. Please do visit us at fasdhub.org.au and we welcome your feedback. The purpose of the webinar today, which is co-hosted by Learning with FASD and the FASD Hub Australia, is called Building Blocks for Success. And what we hope to do is to introduce you as teachers to the website Learning with FASD and to discuss the very important role of teachers in supporting children with FASD to thrive in the school environment. I just want to give you a couple of housekeeping notes. First of all, you will be in listen-only mode. Secondly, the webinar is being recorded and the recording will be circulated to you after the event. And finally, we will have a question and answer session at the end of the webinar. So please do add questions to the Q&A box. We're joined today by 4 speakers with really a huge amount of experience between them. Rebecca Ball is a special education teacher and occupational therapist who has worked in both mainstream and specialist settings around Australia for over 20 years. She's dedicated to improving student engagement and achievement by collaborating with students, their parents, carers, allied health professionals, and of course, educators. Julia Riches is a research officer at the Matilda Centre for Research in Mental Health and Substance Use at the University of Sydney. Since 2020, Julia has worked to develop the Learning with FASD site, a resource funded by the Australian Government Department of Health to help primary school teachers and support staff to understand and support children with FASD. Christine Brooks is Deputy Chair of the NOFASD Australia Board and a teacher with extensive experience, including in a remote Northern Territory community. She also cares for a teenager with FASD. Her lived experience led to her passion for the well-being of young people in the education system, and her commitment is to support those young people and to educate educators about FASD. Marmanji Hand is a proud Wallumeggadigal woman from Fitzroy Crossing. She is an experienced primary school teacher and has also raised 3 children with FASD. Marmanji is passionate about increasing our understanding of FASD, both in Aboriginal communities and in schools. So welcome, everyone. I just want to give you a very brief overview of fetal alcohol spectrum disorder. What is FASD? Well, it's a potentially preventable disorder caused by prenatal alcohol exposure, which results in a brain injury, and this can cause severe neurodevelopmental impairment, which may have permanent long-term consequences for the child. We know that there is a reproducible pattern of facial features that may occur, but this only occurs in a small portion of children. So in many cases, it's the learning and behavioural problems that are visible, and there are no physical features. Although we don't know the prevalence in Australia, we estimate that the prevalence is about 1 to 4% worldwide, and there are certain high-risk groups, including foster care, juvenile justice, and some remote Aboriginal communities. So in short, teachers have a key role in the sort of understanding how to respond to the child with FASD. Of course, you don't have a role in diagnosing FASD, but more in identifying children at risk and referring them to the appropriate services. Next slide. So we know that there are a whole range of harms from prenatal alcohol exposure. So even in the child without FASD, there may be learning and behavioural and developmental problems. And that's because the effects of alcohol are very different depending on the timing and dose of exposure. The important thing here is that in the first 3 months, alcohol may cause physical features, but the brain develops throughout the pregnancy, and hence exposure at any time during the pregnancy may cause learning, behavioural and developmental problems. Next slide. We diagnose fetal alcohol spectrum disorder by getting a very detailed history about alcohol exposure during pregnancy by using a multidisciplinary approach to determine whether there is neurodevelopmental impairment. And of course, we look for the physical features, even though they may not be present. Next slide. These are the sort of areas that we look for impairment. And you can see as teachers that impairment in these domains of function may well limit a child's capacity to excel in the academic system. So there are things like motor skills, which might impair writing, IQ, which might impair learning, language and communication, attention and memory. Next slide. So we have a national registry where we ask paediatricians to report to us cases they have newly diagnosed with fetal alcohol spectrum disorder. So the typical child we see is a male. There's an overrepresentation of Indigenous children and children from remote settings. Very few of these children, about 1 in 5, live with their biological parents, and about 1 in 5 also has a sibling with FASD. The majority of children we see have had some contact with the child protection system. Most have had high-level prenatal alcohol exposure, and others have been exposed to a range of drugs in addition to alcohol. New slide, please. What we find is that in all of these children, they have the severe neurodevelopmental impairment I've mentioned, most commonly problems with attention, executive function, adaptive behaviour, that is living skills, social communication. Many of them have problems with academic achievement, and many of them have problems with language and communication. In addition, many of them come to us with a range of other diagnoses: ADHD, post-traumatic stress disorder, early life trauma, anxiety, intellectual development. And many of them will have a range of physical features. So about 1 in 5 will have a small head circumference. About 1 in 5 will have the typical facial features, and several of them will have some other birth defects. Next slide. So the role of teachers really is very important. And teachers do need to become FASD informed to recognise common difficulties such as delayed development, problems with self-care skills, motor skills, speech and language, all the things I have just mentioned. It's important to understand that these behaviours are based on the brain injury, and that children are often unable to perform the tasks that we ask of them, rather than won't perform those tasks. So it's important for you to focus on their strengths, build on those strengths, build on the family relationships, and work with us as clinicians to help these children achieve as much as they possibly can in their lives, both at school and beyond. Next. I just refer you here to the FASD Hub, where you can get more information about alcohol use in pregnancy and fetal alcohol spectrum disorder. Next. So what I'd like to do now is move on to get some information from people with real lived experience. Now we have two teachers with us, and they both have lived experience having cared for children with fetal alcohol spectrum disorder. So you two are really very well equipped to help us. Perhaps I'll start with you, Christine, and ask you, can you tell me some of the challenges that your daughter faced when she was at school?
Well, thanks, Liz. I have to go back quite a few years. She's 18 now, still at school. And a lot of the problems at that stage I put down to early childhood trauma. And it wasn't until I started learning a lot more about FASD that I started to be able to see the FASD and recognize that it was not part of her personality. It was a different area altogether. It also really helped me to understand so many of the children that I'd been teaching over the years, children that I couldn't quite work out what was going on. They weren't able to do simple tasks often. Behaviour was the things that were showing up, and yet they didn't seem to have any area that I could label them, I suppose would be the right thing to say. When she was at school, she struggled in areas. She had, like many of the children with FASD, she had dysmaturity. It's very common. So she was operating emotionally, socially, and in many of the other areas, probably about half her age. So when she was 8 or 9, she was wanting to constantly play with the 5 and 6-year-olds. This caused problems. She was spoken to about that. And as anybody who works with FASD children, they'll know the consequences are not very successful. So with that, her anxiety would rise up. She would become quite agitated. She started flicking and poking her friends and becoming annoying. She was spoken to again, and you can just see the whole cycle developing. She would become very tired, and I would explain to her teachers that her brain was working twice as hard as everybody else's in the classroom just to keep up. But she was unable to stay awake and would frequently fall asleep during the afternoon. She still, at 18, is falling asleep in the classroom in the afternoon. So after being told she was lazy and I was getting agitated, we were all getting a bit upset, I decided I would make a 1-page profile about her. And I listed that she possibly had FASD and what FASD was. I listed that the triggers for her, what they were, the strategies that I used to help her, and all the little areas that I knew the teachers were not aware of, and also the importance of her strengths. I asked them to work on her strengths. That was the area that we were going to develop. We were going to build on her strengths and help her become the better person and the person that she could achieve, feel a sense of achievement at school. I reminded the teachers that all behaviour is functional. This behaviour needs to be seen. Look at the child differently and you will see that they are not coping because of their behaviour. And when we change the environment, when I had the teachers understand that her behaviour was not because she wouldn't do things, it was because she couldn't. She always appeared with the other children as happy, outgoing. You can't see FASD, it's very hidden. So people didn't believe me. And when they finally could see it and realised, she started settling down. They knew that it was the child behind the behaviour that they needed to support. And she became the most changed child, and certainly in the home where we were very aware, simply because we then started looking at her through different eyes. So she's now about to finish school, and we're very proud of her achievement after all these years. So
thanks so much, Chris. And so often the behavioural challenges lead to lack of self-esteem, lack of capacity to achieve schoolwork. So really, if you can get that understanding of the behaviours is really the first starting point. So Mamanji, you've also had a lot of experience in a very remote community in Fitzroy Crossing. And you've also had experience not only as a teacher, but raising 3 boys with fetal alcohol spectrum disorder. Would you like to comment, what are the main sort of challenges that they had at school?
I guess not only that, there's another young person that we raised with my sister's 2 children, which is was Ronnie and Tristan. When I first became aware there may be something other than affecting these children, in their learning area at school and at home as well. So, as a teacher, when you're in the classroom, you look at the behaviors of children and how do you try and make those needs, meet their needs within the classroom context. And I guess there was a lot of things that I've started finding out. I had children who were turning up to school 100% every day, but they still wasn't getting it right. There was something missing in these children. So I guess one of the young fellas, I started noticing that when I became the year 3 teacher, and there was one young fella in there who just didn't get it, even though he came to school every day. And then through his behavior, I started to notice that, there was something more going on in his learning brain, I guess. And I guess this is where I started to put stuff in place for him to be able to work in the classroom situation. So when, this is in WA, when the assessment, like the West Australian Literacy and Numeracy Assessment, which is WALNA, which graduated to NAPLAN. And I guess this is where I saw children like him, and there was 4 other children in my classroom who couldn't cut it, in the classroom situation. So I guess I had to find ways of engaging these young people in my classroom. So this was my learning about there was something else going on in these young people. It wasn't culturally. It wasn't, because they loved coming to school. And I guess it was about them sitting down, because these kids couldn't sit down, the 20 minutes or 40 minutes that we expect as classroom teachers to expect these children to be able to sit down. They couldn't look at, the stimulation. As classroom teachers, we need to put up stuff around to make our classroom look good for our kids. And all of those stuff had a huge impact on stimulating their sensory modes and for their learning, which triggered off lots of stuff in them. And, that's when the behaviors, I started to notice that, to influence the way of sitting down in a classroom and to behave in a way that teachers expect them to behave. So that was my learning in regards to this, this term now that we are all talking about, the FASD. And I guess that was it. And then, the children that came into my life, was both my husband and I had to change the whole way how we had to look after these children, because each and every one of them didn't have the same behaviors. Their whole learning needs were totally different. So, our class, my home, had to be developed around these 4 children that we had at home.
Okay, so you've both highlighted a lot of problems: behavioural problems, problems with attention and concentration, problems with keeping up with schoolwork, problems with, sensory disorders, and then the need for routines and for repetition. You mentioned, Mamaji, they learn one day and then forget the next. So really a lot of modifications that extend beyond school into the home. So look, I think we might move on now, and we're going to come back to both Mamaji and Christine in the Q&A section. So I'd now like to introduce Rebecca, to tell us a bit about her experience in managing children with FASD. Do you just turn your microphone on, Rebecca?
Sorry, my apologies. Thank you, Elizabeth and Mamaji, and to Chris for putting some stories to the faces that we're talking about with FASD. We conducted some research into how occupational therapists could support children with FASD. And through that research, we came up with the 4 A's, which I think are equally relevant to across disciplines and particularly for us in the education sector if I put my teacher hat on. So I'm going to talk briefly about each of these and particularly the action. So the first one, A, is for awareness. Well done, you're all here. As Liz has mentioned, and as Chris and Mamaji have mentioned too, there are many domains that are affected by for children with FASD, and every child is different. They will have a different presentation depending on their exposure to alcohol prenatally and what damage was done at what time during development. So being aware of that can have is a great start. The second A is for assessment. You people, as Liz mentioned, you have a key role at identifying children at risk of FASD. Your insights are exceptionally important. Your formal and informal assessment, your anecdotal records may help inform a referral to your specialist education person who's at your school, student support services, or directly towards a general practitioner. As Liz mentioned, your role isn't to discuss or to diagnose, but to support and to suggest a pathway. The third one, A, is for action. This, again, is where I'll spend my key time. But mainly, we don't want you to wait for a diagnosis. There's always time and a way that you can act. Early intervention is essential, and you might suspect a child has FASD, but that path to a diagnosis can be a very long one, and it doesn't mean you can't start your intervention already. Fourth A is for advocacy, and regardless of your role in the school, you can build capacity within your school, within the families, within the education community. You can advocate for further supports, you can advocate for funding, you can advocate for environmental changes. So please keep in mind these 4 A's. Next slide. So as an OT, we're involved with any aspect of life or learning that occupies a person's time. And we look at different factors. The first one being the person. We also look at the task or the occupation that a person is trying to do. And we also look at environmental factors that might influence participation and engagement. So I'm going to structure my actions or your actions along these 3 areas: the person, the task, and the environment. First and foremost, build a relationship with these little poppets. As Mamaji and Christine mentioned, talk to the individual child, build a rapport with them, build trust. Don't promise what you can't deliver. Spend time, even if it's a moment, a quiet time with that child. We know that if they have that secure person that they can, you are going to reach the best possible outcomes. Create a relationship with their family and involve their carers. By doing so, you can share stories, you can celebrate successes, you can find out, did they have breakfast, how are they sleeping, how did they go getting ready for school, and all of that can play into how they're going to participate once they're in your care in the classroom. It also helps with that translation of skills into different environments that are it's really valuable. As it's already been mentioned, find the children's strengths and use these to overcome areas of challenge. If a child has a real strength in oral language skills, for example, but they cannot put pen to paper, use video recordings or voice to text to help them communicate their understandings. If a child is experiencing dysmaturity or showing signs of that, maybe structure in some time where they're given opportunities for leadership for children of a younger age and given responsibility for that. As Chris mentioned, all behaviour is functional. Those triggers and be aware of those things can tell us a real story about what the child is feeling. Confabulation is I guess a memory distortion, which I often see coming back from playtime, where children can say what they think people want to hear or what I want to hear as a carer, or they are really confused and their memory gaps are not necessarily patching together that event accurately. So they might fill in the gap with the story and it doesn't necessarily make sense. That's not necessarily done with intent or deceit. It's really a sign that that child is having some memory concerns. And that's, again, I would advise you just to listen and distract, and then revisit that down the track, potentially with a social story. It's not that the child doesn't care, it's often that they just don't understand. And it's not that they're rude, it just means that they may not know how to read the emotions. So again, lead by example, name it. I can see you might be feeling such and such. I wonder if this might help, and help them get on board with that. Next slide. Thank you. So the task, get to know your child and their individual patterns of needs. I've spoken about that. They might be great at debating and arguing, for example, but they need, and so provide debating opportunities, but help them structure their writing in a pervasive text by putting, getting a scaffold and things together. If you haven't become aware of this so far, the Universal Design for Learning and Learning Profiles are both really excellent proactive strategies to design learning experience that can be accessible for all students. They provide multiple ways to engage, multiple ways to represent, and multiple ways to express their knowledge, which is really important to allow for that flexibility. As Chris and Mamaji noted, or Chris mentioned in particular, that her daughter kept falling asleep, and this can be a sign of that cognitive overload. The signs can be they're withdrawing, they're wanting to go to the toilet all the time, or their disruptive behaviours, task avoidance. They're really working harder to achieve the same outcomes as other children in the class without this brain difficulty. We need to scaffold their learning. We need to provide them worked examples. We need to give them technological supports or assistive technologies. Microsoft Edge, Read Write Chrome is great. You can have immersive readers, you can have spelling apps and things which can remove one or two areas of challenge and allow you to then get to the real outcome that you wanted to measure. With maths, for example, as well, you'd want to build on what they know, get out the concrete materials, embed those multi-sensory experiences for these children. We want to move from concrete to pictures and then to the abstract. So often with our crowded curriculum, we go straight to the abstract and not go back. And we need to use these multi-sensory ideas when we're delivering tasks and planning, as we know that's how we can move things from their working memory into long-term memory, opportunities to rehearse and build on that through storytelling, etc. We want to be flexible with our programming. We want to be able to, if the child needs a break, have a buddy system with another class. When you're moving to the library, go to the obstacle course and do some resistance work, or swing from the monkey bars if need be, again, helping with that sensory input. Next slide. And finally, we look at the environment. As Mamaji mentioned, the distractions in the classroom, you might think it looks fantastic and there's things hanging, etc., but it can be very visually distracting, and it's a very busy place visually, and that can be highly dysregulating to many of these children, and it limits their ability to focus. Noisy rooms, sometimes headphones are helpful, but having breakout spaces can be really useful. Involve the child in their own goal setting and what works and what doesn't work for them. By getting their buy-in, you're more likely to have better outcomes. Have a look at outdoor learning. Think about their sensory needs. Fidgets can be really great, but they can also, if they're overused, they can become what we call habituated, and they become really a distraction in the end. So if you're going to use fidgets, just limit the amount of time that you're using them with these kids and use them for a purpose. Talk about their energy level and does that meet the task? If it doesn't meet the energy required for the task, you might need to ask them, well, what can amp you up, or what can bring you back down again? So try and get them to articulate how they can reduce and monitor their energy for the tasks as well, can be really helpful. I know I've spoken a million miles an hour and I could talk about this all day, but I'm conscious of time. So please keep in mind the 4 A's, and keep in mind how you can think about the person and the task and the environment, and the adaptations that you can make. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Rebecca, for that. And I'd now like to invite Julia to tell us all a little bit about the Learning with FASD resources. Thanks, Julia.
Thanks so much, Liz, and thanks to all the other wonderful speakers so far. So I'm just going to quickly provide some information on Learning with FASD and the resources that we have on the website. So Learning with FASD is funded by the Australian Government Department of Health and Aged Care, and it was developed as a collaboration between the Matilda Centre, Australian educators, and leading experts. So it's a centralised access point for evidence-based resources that assist primary school teaching and support staff to understand and support children with FASD in Australian schools. So I'll just really quickly touch on the development process. So the website was developed based on the findings of a scoping review and a series of consultations. So we identified and reviewed 124 existing resources for the primary education sector in order to identify gaps in the currently available suite of resources. And we also conducted consultations with primary school teaching and support staff, FASD and education experts, and parents and caregivers of children with FASD in order to determine needs and preferences for new resources. So over 90 individuals were consulted during the development of Learning with FASD. And Learning with FASD houses 25 evidence-based resources, 9 of which were developed by the research team, which are those listed on this slide. And then a further 16 high-quality externally developed resources are also housed on the website. So Learning with FASD is organised around 3 topics that are designed to address key priority areas for educators. So the first topic is understanding FASD. And the resources in this section include information on the impact of FASD on learning and behaviour in the school environment, and a guide to the referral and diagnostic process, particularly when concerns are identified in school, and some short explanatory videos. So what is FASD? What's a day in the life of a child with FASD like when they're at school? So the second topic is classroom strategies, which provides brief evidence-based strategies that teaching and support staff can implement in the classroom to support a student with FASD in their ongoing learning. And then finally, our third topic is family engagement, which contains the resources that are designed to assist educators to work with and support families of children with FASD. And we also conducted an evaluation for the website with 74 primary school teaching and support staff, and we received sort of overwhelmingly positive feedback. Educators thought the website was useful and easy to use, and they indicated they'd be likely to use Learning with FASD in the future and would even recommend it to a colleague. So if you have any questions about the website specifically, don't hesitate to ask or contact us via email. Our contact details will be at the end of the webinar. But that's just a brief summary of the resources you can find on the website. And I'll just hand back over to Liz now for the next section.
Thanks very much, Julia, for telling us about that website, and we would like your feedback. So do have a look at the website and get back to us. Now, I'd just like to introduce Christine again to tell us a little bit about another resource provided by NOFASD.
Thank you so much, Liz. I'll be quick with this. We are very proud to be NOFASD Australia, which stands for National Organisation for Fetal Alcohol Spectrum Disorder. Very proud to be the oldest established FASD organisation in Australia. We have a wonderful website, so please have a look at it. We have a helpline that runs 7 days a week, 365 days of the year. So there to help with all sorts of questions. We run a lot of training courses available for online training, face-to-face, whatever your needs are in all sectors, in the health sector, the justice sector, and the education sector, of course. We have wonderful online courses, some specially suited to teachers, that particular one called run with 7 modules, 20 minutes each. It's Australian Foundations in FASD, and it's a brilliant course. We have support groups, which we often run for parents of children that have been recommended by the teachers, and they have proved to be very successful. So Families Linking with Families are our support groups that run throughout the year. Resources, we've just put out a wonderful resource for the early years called Through Different Eyes. Highly recommend that, and that's for the early years of education. And also conferences. So next May, we're having a wonderful conference that will be advertised throughout our website. So please have a look at our website. It's full, jam-packed with information, all sorts of areas that probably can answer a lot of your questions. Thanks, Elizabeth.
Thanks very much, Christine. So that brings us really to the Q&A session. We have had a couple of questions from the audience. If you have any questions, please put them in now to the Q&A function. So the first question, and perhaps I'll ask you, Rebecca, to address this one. How do we overcome parent denial of the diagnosis? You're muted, Rebecca.
So sorry. Again, it might be better for others to talk about this, but I guess when I've spoken to families initially with my health professional hat on, or even in the education setting, it's really no blame. This isn't a situation where anyone would intentionally harm their child. We're there to support, we're there to offer strategies, we're there to offer pathways for intervention and support for their child, which can be lifelong. A lot of children with FASD can gain support through the NDIS, depending on their level of difficulty across various areas. And by talking to families about that and the pathways to support, it can often relieve a lot of the stress involved with this and provide some comfort that people are on their side. Referring them to the NOFASD hub is also really helpful. The helpline, as Christine mentioned, the Families Linking with Families, is a really good opportunity for them to talk through what stage of the journey they're at as well. And we've got to respect that. Sorry, Christine, you might have something to add.
I just wanted to jump in the importance of collecting evidence, keeping records, gathering information, and then having that as your sort of first step to talk to parents. I think that if you can say your concerns and you've got evidence. The other thing is, I think we all need to be very aware we cannot diagnose. We're teachers. We're not in a position to start saying your child has got FASD, and we need to be very mindful that this a lot of the characteristics overlap with other disorders. But if we suspect, and even if we happen to know prenatal alcohol exposure has existed, it's a very sensitive area. We need to go so carefully and constantly be non-judgmental and supportive of those parents that are facing a probably fairly rocky road.
Thanks, Chris. Could I ask Marmaji and Julie to turn on your cameras?
I've been trying and it's still not coming on, but I can hear you. So
we can hear you.
But I do agree with what Christine says. As teachers, we cannot, diagnose. We leave that up to the doctors and all the specialist people. But it's just for us to ensure that, we are building a safe environment for those children with complex issues and stuff like that. So I guess being an experienced teacher, not only that, but also an experience in raising children, on the spectrum. I guess this is one way, a very sensitive area, not only in the Indigenous community, but in the wider community as well, in how we actually go sit there and use the tools that we've got as educators within the system to be able to, recognize there is a learning difficulties with our children in the classroom.
Yeah, and just from a clinician point of view, we of course do give parents the opportunity to use that diagnosis or not. For example, to share the diagnostic label with the school or not. because really what you need to know as teachers is what that child's capacity and strengths are as a result of the assessment that we've done. And some biological parents will choose not to share the diagnosis. We've got a couple of other questions here. One is for me, and it's, is there a certain demographic, racial area, etc., where there are higher rates of fetal alcohol spectrum disorder? And this is, of course, also a sensitive question. We know that internationally there are certain high-risk groups, children in foster care, children in mental health services, children in justice services and child protection. But I just really want to emphasise that this is a problem that affects any social group, any demographic group all over Australia, and it's certainly possible that it's hidden in some groups and more obvious in others. So the answer is yes, there are certain high-risk groups, but alcohol doesn't discriminate and can affect any child from any background. Now, there's a question here for Christine and Marmaji. As carers of children with FASD, how do you want education staff to work with you to ensure that your child is best supported in their learning? So, Chris, if you could say one thing, what would your best advice be?
I could say a lot of things, but probably that the teachers become very well FASD informed, that they start seeing the child through FASD lenses and they really understand how that child is. They become an advocate for the child, and they also support the child to become an advocate for themselves, so that they have an understanding of what their needs are and where they need support, and keeping that relationship with parents very open, very honest, and very non-judgmental. I think that's important. Mama G.
Okay, Mama G, if you had a piece of advice.
I'm still having issues with and you can't see my face, but yeah, I guess, you know, having experience with that, you know, our son now is, he'll be turning 24 this year, and he's a role model, not only that, for the community here at, you know, at Fitzroy Crossing. Even just a parent came up to me in the supermarket yesterday and said, you know, what a marvelous job we did with this young fella. I mean, he does own his own car. He does gets up to work early. I mean, he still have those things, but he's got a very good self-regulation, because those are the stuff that we taught him, not only at school, but also at home. And I guess, you know, teachers of our children, they need to sit down and engage with us at home, and trying to put those strategies, you know, the FASD strategies that are around now in the classroom setting with our children, and understand those children who may be on the spectrum, and how to best meet the best outcomes for our children in their learning journey.
Yes, Mama G, you've done a wonderful job with your eldest, and I think that really important point, addressing the behaviours which will then enable him to learn and function otherwise. Rebecca, there's a question for you. How important is early intervention for children with FASD? Can you give some positive stories from your experience?
Of course, thanks, Liz. We know that early intervention, intervening as early as possible, right from infants through early childhood, it's the greatest phase of brain development. So if we can or supports and build capacity with those early years, it can certainly be a very protective factor for that child into the future. It builds their capacity, it reduces their likelihood of secondary issues arising when it comes to disengagement from education, disengagement from employment down the track, interactions with the justice system in the worst case scenario. But it also gives the family, but also that child, time to understand what FASD is, and most importantly, become an advocate for themselves and understand what that disability looks like for them, so they can say, I have FASD and this is what I need, as they move through from primary to secondary and secondary to post-school options. It's really, really important, I feel, to intervene as best as possible. And the children that I've seen who have had that early knowledge, knowledge is power. It's been really encouraging to see children in grade 4, grade 5 who have been able to understand that and be able to articulate that in the classroom, and they become a little bit more confident in their own abilities, and understand that yes, they have challenges, but they can also identify when their triggers are occurring and can minimize those themselves. And when they've got buy-in, they're not relying on other people and family and friends and teachers to stop those escalations in behavior happening. They can start doing it themselves.
And as a clinician, I mean, we see a lot of, sorry, Mumji, with children with alcohol exposure in whom we can't necessarily make the diagnosis at that point of time. But if we can identify what their needs are and put in place those early strategies, that's really beneficial. Mumji.
Yeah, I guess that, you know, my experience, because as you know, Liz, I've met my 3 boys, and all the three of them has faced different challenges through their learning life. The young one, which I call the high functioning young fella, he's 17 now, but soon as he entered high school, that's where all the triggers, you know, not the challenging behavior because of the executive functioning within his learning brain, and because of the you know, how we build a high school in a remote location. That particular young fella, he dropped out of school at the age at 13, and in no way could we, you know, get him back into the school setting, because for him, he found high school very challenging. Whereas the 19-year-old, he managed to stay focused at school, but he still had his challenges. So, you know, the positive and the negative that through with the 3 boys that I've raised, really, you know, showed us, you know, we still have got a long way in regards to making the environment as best, the learning environment, to accommodate all these children who's got complex needs and complex challenges.
Thanks, Mumji.
I'd like to share with you.
Thank you. There's a question here, medication or not. So I guess that one's for me. And certainly I think that there is a role for medication. Of course, we will try the routines and the repetition and the behavioural therapies first, but there's certainly a role of medication. And most commonly, we see stimulants used for children with ADHD, which can make a huge difference. We use drugs such as melatonin used for children because many of them have a significant sleep disorder. And occasionally children will require medications for anxiety or depression or other mental health problems. That doesn't mean that they'll be on those medications for life, but it can really be a circuit breaker and make a significant difference to their performance in the education system. Now, we've got here another question. Is there a screening question for FASD that can be used in the education setting? And I guess I'll start with that and come back to the fact that we don't really think that teachers need to be making a diagnosis. Really what I think the teacher's role is to identify children who are struggling at school with their learning or with their behaviours, and make sure that they have a discussion with the parents and have a strategy for that child to get an assessment, usually from a paediatrician. It's really, I don't think, the role of teachers, and it's a very difficult area to be questioning the issue of alcohol exposure during pregnancy. Although you may be aware of some parents who have a significant problem with an alcohol disorder. I don't know, Chris, you were nodding your head. I don't know whether you want to add to that.
I'm agreeing with you. I'm agreeing with you. I think we can slip quickly into that role with all sorts of disorders and decide that we're not classroom teachers and we know a lot more, and that can get ourselves into a terrible situation. So it's about having the evidence, talking to the parents about your concerns, and then recommending that they get assessed.
Great. Now, there's a question here about funding. What funding is available to families who have children with FASD and to schools who have children in their classroom? Rebecca, would you like to address that one?
Sure. It certainly will depend on which education setting you're in around the country, or I've got some international participants here today as well. But certainly in Australia with the NDIS, if you have a child who is under the age of 9 now, who you feel is having concerns across a number of developmental domains, you can refer them to your early childhood practitioners in your local area, who can conduct further assessments to see if they can receive early intervention supports under the early intervention program through the NDIS. They don't need the diagnosis at that point, but it does allow access to funding for early intervention depending on their level of need. Obviously, it needs to be across a number of developmental domains. When the child reaches the age of 9 to move on to the NDIS proper, that is when they need the formal diagnosis, and that is when potentially, if the child has been diagnosed with FASD, then that is officially recognised as a disability through the NDIS now. And again, depending on their level of adaptive function and their level of need, the diagnosis itself doesn't equate to funding through the NDIS. It's their profile of at what levels of need do they have, and is it having significant functional impairment to them across schooling or employment or living skills. With education sector, it depends again where you're at. A lot of children with FASD would meet the criteria for substantial supports under the NCCD, the Consensus for Disability within schools, and you can sometimes apply for disability inclusion plans depending on, again, where that's being rolled out, for further funding within your school to provide an aid or small support groups, etc. So I hope that answers the question. It's very broad, but hopefully that's helped.
Thanks, Rebecca. There's a question here: is other drug use in pregnancy, does it have similar results to alcohol? And I'll just briefly comment that the most commonly used other drugs are cannabis and nicotine, and we do have some evidence that cannabis can have a synergistic effect. That is, it can increase the effects of alcohol in neurodevelopmental outcomes. So more work needs to be done to really evaluate that. There's a question here: why does the ICD-11 list fetal alcohol syndrome and not spectrum? The original description of alcohol effects in children was fetal alcohol syndrome, and they were children who had the neurodevelopmental problems but had 3 typical facial features, often birth defects and poor growth. But we now appreciate that, depending on the timing of exposure, only about 1 in 5 children will have those physical features. And so the term has changed from common use from fetal alcohol syndrome to fetal alcohol spectrum disorder. And there is more information about that on the FASD hub. There's a question here for teachers. You know, while some children can understand their diagnosis, some others can't, and that presumably depends on their cognitive capacity and their age. What language should teachers use when discussing fetal alcohol spectrum disorder and the differences in brain function? So again, that's quite a complex question. Christine, the age at which a child might be told about the diagnosis.
It's a very complex question because it very much depends on that particular child. And I think it's like all of these big major questions and discussions in life. You need to know that the child is ready and probably mature enough to really sort of have some understanding. And at the same time, you don't want to leave it too late. But in my situation, we started fairly young. She was about 8 or 9 and she was struggling with things. And I said, did you know that your brain works a little bit differently? Because your mum didn't know that it was not safe to drink alcohol when you were growing inside her. And it was as simple as that. And then she started saying, is that why I can't do this? Is that why I can't do that? So for her, it was a very positive. It's not always a positive. And I think you need to be very mindful that maybe it's too early or too harsh and then wait for some questions to come up. Why can't I do what the other children are doing? And then simply explain that your brain is working in a different way. But of course, going back to the wonderful positives that you can do and all the strengths that the child has. So it is a tricky one. And I think you need to be very aware and be having that wonderful relationship with the child too.
Yeah, I guess the same way, Christine, it can have a positive effect and it's a negative as well. So for in my situation, I started talking about that in a different manner to the boys that I've raised. I just say to them, your brain is wired differently to the rest of us. And this is where, and I used the jigsaw scenario in regards to that. You know, sometimes it can fit all together for you, and sometimes one piece may be missing. So that's the way, so that you don't, you know, say, well, because I've heard FASD in our community used very negatively towards the impact to quite a number of children and people here in Fitzroy. I guess for us as a community and as a whole, I think we need to still go back into, you know, the awareness again of saying, okay, how do we look after and our children's emotional and health and well-being, you know, mentally as well. And I guess that's one of the things that through our learning, and that's what we've you know, come across, because at the moment both of my grandson are facing a really huge challenging at the moment, and for both my husband and I, we have to be mentally as well prepared, you know, to be able to work with the two grandson who's 19 and the other one 17, so, and to be with them at present. So I guess you know, for
so
all
Mama
of
G,
us,
I think you make that very important point that we've really got to care for the parents as well, and the point that many of these children are in kinship care or foster care, and we need to care for their extended families and carers. So I'm afraid we're out of time. We've had a really good response for this webinar. We will try and organise some more webinars or other educational opportunities for teachers. So it really just leaves me time to thank all our speakers and participants. Thank you all for your questions. Thank you to Kate Harford and to Julia Richards for organising today. And I'm going to put up a poll in a second and ask all of you attending to use the poll. Do visit the FASD Hub, do visit Living with FASD, and do visit the NOFASD website. And once again, thank you very much for attending.